Welcome back to the Flick Lab. As the film also has this particular word, it's kind of fitting for our episode's mood as well, I believe. Today, nightmare. I'm Karri. My co-host is Henrik.
This is Karri's prime time.
Bitch. Yeah, so we have already covered Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one, quite early on in this podcast, episode 20 something. Go check that out if you haven't, and then you can listen to the Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge episode, which I also considered quite a great movie. And now we're in the third part, and Henrik is a super fan of it. I'm not so much. So we're gonna clash again, as in the previous episodes, pretty much.
Yep. Yeah. And do remember, everybody, that my opponent today is a man who considers Freddy's Revenge to be a great movie.
Yeah. Well, great is kind of too much, but I do enjoy it.
Yeah. Today's film, Nightmare on Elm Street: Dream Warriors. This is kind of a infamous film, quite divisive. There, with Nightmare community, it's almost like we have two camps. There is the camp where I belong to, who consider that this is rather a good film. I go as far as to say that this is one of the franchise highlights. And then there is the other side, which is much more Curry's territory, who consider that this is a complete abomination, and this would be kind of the film that is at fault for ruining the franchise and making it shit.
All in all, I think it's just a film that doesn't speak to me as much as the previous entries. After this one, of course, the film series just ceases to exist for me as far as innovations go or as far as ideas go, and the general film quality is gonna drop immensely after the third one.
Yeah, I on the other hand, I see that this is kind of the moment where the franchise kind of peaks. And following this point onwards, the franchise continues as being more imaginative.
Well, if you consider those sudden scenes where something happens in the bathroom, which quite doesn't make any sense, imaginative, it's just there for most of the time, especially I would say in the parts of 4 or 5. It's just there to be kind of cool props.
And I on my end, I am completely fine with that. In fact, cool props and exciting shit happening is kind of what I have been waiting for the franchise to do for these past two movies.
So you're kind of the person who likes the Q branch here, whereas once again I am not a big fan of it.
I do think that, well, seeing how the franchise's big gimmick is supposed to be that that the horror takes place within people's dreams. Freddy is supposed to be a ghost dream killer, the kind of a lord of dreams, this almost omnipotent godlike entity within the dream world. I kind of feel that the past two entries in the franchise have kind of been, lacking in the whole dream aspect. I'm not saying that the films necessarily succeed as horror movies all the time. Eh, and the further kind of the franchise it goes, the kind of a lessened the horror will be, to a point where, well, part six is I would say it's almost downright comedy with only a few kind of a weird terrifying themes or aspects dropped here and there around the movie. But I still do feel that when it comes to the whole Dream Master aspect, once from from Dream Warriors onwards, the franchise gets more playful with the dreams,
Mm-hmm.
and it starts to get more and more inventive in the ways how well, essentially how Freddy kills people.
But
In the first two films, it's mostly knife kills, which are then which come accompanied by couple of one-shot murders here and there. Like, for example, the whole Johnny Depp blood fountain thing that happens in the first one. Really great moment, but that's kind of a one aspect where Freddy really does something like truly out of this world. And outside of those few kills, it mostly is dude just knifing someone to death.
yeah, I felt that what made the first one and the second one work for me really well were that there were still some kind of groundedness about those dreams, and dreams can be grounded. Whereas the part three kind of goes the whole 9 yards and wants to make it into this fantastical, almost kind of a action adventure fantasy. It's not even depicted as horror in all of the kind of articles that I went through. It's more about some kind of a slasher, fantasy slasher was what they called it. Well, yeah, slasher is horror in a sense, but what made the first and second one work for me, I think it was that it was relatively grounded and there was still some kind of a playbook there. And even if you are trying to challenge me on the second part where Freddy is rising from the next to the pool, jumps in and starts to slaughter the people in real life, well, this is exactly what happened also in the first one, where Nancy pulled the guy out of her dream to the real world. And something like this kind of a transition is happening here, where Freddy is kind of one leg at least in the real world. And that's how he is able to do that. For some reason, Wes Craven has a really hard time accepting that. Then he goes on to write with three other guys this third part, and the rules are off the table.
Yeah, a number of notions considering everything that you said. I First of all, I fully do understand where you're coming from, and I'm not really trying to disagree with you here. It comes essentially it comes down to matter of taste.
Mm,
You like the more grounded stuff, and while I do admit that it is perhaps it can sell the building of tension better at times, because there's a lot of things that go around even in the first film. But I can get it that you appreciate the more grounded dreams of the first two films, and I do actually agree with the sentiment that these that part three onwards, nightmare films are kind of a fantasy slashers. That's actually pretty accurate depiction of what these films become. But for me, I always was more interested about the fantasy slashers, and that's gotta what I always expected to find from nightmare films. It perhaps helps that my first film I ever saw was Freddy's Revenge, and I never really liked that movie so much. And then
mm.
I came to Dream Warriors, and I kind of got this experience that Dream Warriors was fixing a lot of things for me that I felt Freddy's Revenge was failed to do. But I've always kind of sympathized more with fantasy slasher elements of the franchise over the more grounded ones.
Yeah, for me, there is something about this more one-on-one situation where you have Nancy against Freddy, whereas in the part three you have this whole group fighting Freddy, and that in itself is already starting to make the film more not so much of a horror movie, something a little bit more fantastical, frankly. And then there are these group dream problems. I'm not really a big fan of the idea that we have shared dreams because all the time when you're watching this, you have this feeling like, really, really, do you want to go down this rabbit hole and all the possible problems that it might introduce in the mind of the viewer? For example, using this group hypnosis and going into dream, magically they are all together in this one dream and able to teleport into one of these isolation rooms. Yes, it's
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
It is bit problematic, especially if you try to kind of find any kind of a sense and a logic, like truly properly rationally understand how exactly is this going to work. Because, like you mentioned, yes, once the group dream thing gets introduced, so Kirsten can essentially she can pull anyone into her dreams whenever the plot tells her to, and like you mentioned, they can teleport into one location, like the quiet room where Kirsten is being held, even though she's not pulling them in the dream, and she does not know that the others of the group are currently dreaming. They can just do that, and then there is a whole thing when they are in the group dream. They are within, they are inside the quiet room, and Freddy starts to slash the walls, and Nancy yells to the group that don't get separated, and some feathers fly around, and they are immediately separated, all of them. So yes, it's kind of it's kind of hit and miss. It's kind of hit and miss. It works for me in that fantasy way,
And
but at the same time, I do admit that it opens up a whole can of worms.
naturally, a can of worms has been opened several times in parts one and two already, especially when you're just dealing with some kind of a concept like a dream and your characters interacting in that in some kind of a real world sense and pulling people and objects out of it. Insofar as Freddy Krueger is a person. But then we get to part three where we have magical doors somehow appearing to them that will take them to the boiler room. We have Freddy who appears in several kinds of forms. For example, the so called penis worm doing the kind of a
Hmm.
vaginal area eating as seen in the kind of illustrations or small size replicas before shooting the actual scene as being kind of part of the idea, obviously. But this and the fact that the Freddy can appear so randomly anywhere, like you said about the slashing of this room's walls all of a sudden. Basically, he's doing so many random things throughout these films, especially part three, that, well, there are no rules. You could just start this movie with the first scene, and Fred would just slash the shit out of all the characters and just roll the credits. Same logic.
You could. That's one thing that's always been with Freddy Krueger, ever since the first film, is that the franchise wants to portray Krueger as someone who is really over empowering within the Dreamverse. Like when you fall asleep, you are almost completely in Krueger's mercy, and I get why that is being done. It makes the survivor characters to be more on the loose edge and on a thin ice, meaning that they have to fight harder in order to survive the film. So naturally that builds tension. However, the downside of that has always been the fact that Kruger always just kind of fails to kill the brats. Like you have the guy who can one shot kill a character, and does that repeatedly in every installment of the franchise. And then there are just those few guys who Freddy always completely fails to maim to death somehow.
Yeah,
Something that also is kind of a running theme with the films is the near misses that Kruger has when it comes to knifing someone.
yeah, in his own playing field, in the dreams where things should be more possible for him.
Yup. And it even happens when the dreams trap the other characters. Like you see in Dream Warriors, like you were seeing in the previous installments, where the floor kind of changes and it becomes this star and it traps the dreamer. She's trying to run away, but the floor is tar, so she can't move and the Kruger is approaching, and it's in the final moment. She somehow gets her is able to run again, and Kruger near misses her his target.
We have kind of talked about it already, but what do you think about the overall tonal shift here? Because I think it's something that we should concentrate on as well. Freddy shifting from a what I would call a dream monster into a dream jester more in this film. So it's not so scary. It's more funny, isn't it?
Yes and no. Yes and no. There are a couple of things when it comes to the tonal shift, which most definitely does happen in part three. This is the one where Freddy starts to utilize one-liners, and like already mentioned, he starts to be more playful in the dreams. He starts to more mimic objects and use objects within the dreams. Like in part three, he turns into a television, which turns into television Freddy, which kills a person. That type of stuff starts to happen from three onwards, and it is a tonal shift, and it does not necessarily work for everyone. I kind of feel that that tonal shift is what eventually kept the franchise alive, because I kind of believe that Freddy Krueger, the person he was being in the first two films, kind of reached the end of his road in those two films, and you somehow
Mm,
have to reinvent Krueger in order to gush out what 4 or 5 more sequels.
yeah, no doubt. You had already done what you had done in part one and two and established the character, how the character more or less works. So it was time to introduce some new frontiers of the character with and everything was obviously very consciously done that this time it's not gonna be only one character against Freddy, it's gonna be a group. And it's gonna take a more
Yeah,
fantastical direction.
yeah. And another thing with Freddy Krueger is that when it comes to the list of horror villains, when we talk about our pinheads and Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees and stuff like that Krueger has always been very inconsistent horror film villain.
Yeah.
Even in the previous two films, you had this kind of a conflict between how Freddy was being portrayed in in within a singular movie. Like even in the first one, which everybody seems to agree is some kind of a horror masterpiece that does everything right and is nothing more than band-shitting terror through and throughout. You have Freddy Krueger, the extremely intimidating dream killer, who is pure nightmare fuel. And then you have Freddy Krueger, the dude who just kind of has really long arms in one scene. And then you have Freddy Krueger who chops off his own goddamn fingers for some reason.
Because
And then you have Freddy Krueger, the goofy dumbass who walks straight into every single Home Alone trap that just happens, and eventually is beaten because Nancy turns her back to him, and that outdoes Freddy.
yeah, because it's connected to what
And
you got at the bridge with Johnny Depp's character. You know, Johnny Depp's character. I'm already forgetting his name. John. No.
I can never remember Johnny Depp's character either. It's just Johnny Depp.
Yeah, Johnny Depp is giving the advice to Nancy's character, Nancy, that there is this whatever ancient belief that if you turn your back to the monster, then it will disappear because if you do that and you do not fear this antagonist in your dreams, then the monster will disappear and you will this energy that you have given for this monster will disappear. And that's kind of the story arc.
Yeah, it is the story arc. Just one thing with that story arc. At that point, the film has made a huge song and dance number about how Freddy becomes real and physical after Nancy pulls something out of the dream world. That's around the whole concept around which the whole Home Alone traps are built upon. That Freddy becomes real and physical because Nancy pulls him out.
Mm-hmm.
So now we have a, a burnt victim, real and physical burnt victim, who has real and physical knives in his hands,
Yeah,
and he still gets defeated because Nancy turns her back. Like I haven't heard any mugging happening in real life where dude beats the mugger by turning his back to the mugger and walking away.
it's
You just get mugged.
yeah,
That's what
yeah,
happens.
it's clear that it's not entirely consistent. But when it comes to these chopped off fingers, in these moments, Freddy is still very scary, even though he's doing all these goofy things. For me, I never saw the problem with the huge hands at the alley. I thought that just works for me. But then there are these character inconsistencies or the way that the character gets changed throughout the first film. If you're not talking about the first film, then and when he's pulled out of the dream world, yeah, he becomes physical, and that's why the Home Alone stuff is working so well on Freddy. That's my theory. And of course, yeah, then by the end, he's being destroyed by this "I turn my back on you" thing. Well, I guess he's still the dream monster, something like that.
Something like that. It's a noble idea. Like that's what I always maintain with the first Nightmare. It has some really good ideas.
Yeah, yeah,
The main concept of Freddy is absolutely terrifying, and even the concept of you essentially beating the monster by taking back your fear.
yep.
That's also I do honestly feel that that's a good concept.
But Henrik, do you remember the photography in this film? How it's shot. There are those moments where the film is still building up, where it's pretty spooky scary to be frank. My favorite moments must be when the first kind of proper dream starts and the girlfriend character is on the alley and the way that it's built and then the trash can top is rolling on the street and you see the shadow of the hat. All that is beautiful, beautiful stuff. Another place where this works so well is when Nancy is at the school and goes to the cellars and asks, "Who are you?" And then he steps onto the frame. Doesn't answer the goddamn question, which is what you're supposed to do. And not what happens in part 3, where we have the nun basically explaining all about Freddy. But once again, I understand the flip side of it. It's the part 3. You need to do something else with the character. Frankly, this is what they decided to do.
Yeah, and in part three, everybody already knows. Like you also have to remember the kind of a franchise perspective and the ticket sale perspective, the producer perspective into these things. At this point, Nightmare was already a major franchise. So when it came to Freddy Krueger, when it came to Krueger's identity, when it came to what Krueger was, basically every mystery that was there in the first film that came as a surprise to audiences. At this point in time, in real world, everybody was already in on who Krueger was.
Yeah,
He was talked to death to a point where basically there was no longer a point asking from Freddy who he is, or even trying to explain what the fuck Kruger does, because everyone in the audience already knows it.
In the documentaries, Heather Langenkamp playing Nancy explains how there were some trick or treaters coming to her door, and there would be some kid who had been dressed up as Fred Krueger, and that kind of started to ring her bells. That yeah, nobody's dressing up as Nancy, but somebody's dressing up as Fred Krueger. This is at the point where she was kind of apparently happy to just get over and done with the first one, and didn't didn't really have any aspirations to return for a second one. Probably the big reason being that Wes Craven was not involved by his own volition. But yeah, he started to realize that this is now kind of a big icon that people connect with hugely. And then Wes Craven was offered this work to co-write or write with other people this part three, and that's how Heather Langenkamp got involved. I'm not sure where I was going with this, but this is what happened.
Yeah. Even though, as far as I've understood, Craven's original script really got done dirty by the producers who felt that Craven's script was way too dark. So essentially, as far as I've understood, that the whole shit was pretty much rewritten to make it more softer.
Well, there's so many versions and treatments, it seems, that there was the first concept where the kids would be moving to the same city to commit suicide, but this was deemed as too controversial, so they didn't go with that. And I'm not sure if it was part of the same concept, but there was an idea that Freddy was going to invade the real world and hunting the actors filming the Nightmare on Elm Street actors filming the Nightmare on Elm Street sequel, which of course Wes Craven was later able to do on the so-called Part 7, the new Nightmare.
Yeah.
But then there was also John Saxon's treatment, where the overarching idea was that Fred Krueger was never guilty of child molestation or child murder, but rather he was wrongly convicted and burned alive, even though the real killings were done by Charles Manson's gang. Sounds really stupid, to be frank. Uh, then there was England's treatment, where Tina Gray's older sister returns to Springwood to investigate her sister's untimely death. And some parts of that treatment were used in Freddy's Nightmares, the TV series.
Yeah, it kind of gets messy trying to figure out exactly what was shot in any given time within the franchise. Like what script are we once again following, and what scripts got left behind, and in the final product, what is being imported in any given script version.
But another big point that we should discuss is the character decisions of the film. So some of them are really nonsensical, and that rather bothered me. The biggest is when Kincaid doesn't wake up Philip, just says, "Have a nice stroll, asshole," when he's sleepwalking. And then when the guy is actually dead, he is in the group chat and he just goes, "Oh, well, he wasn't strong enough, so he got wasted. That's all." Nice guy.
Uh, yeah. Once again, I do have to admit this is something that doesn't make perfect sense. That the film, of course, it tries to elude this earlier when it makes the knowing point that Philip has a habit of
That is
sleepwalking.
true.
That's yeah, that's what's supposed to go on with Kincaid during that night. Of course, it doesn't make real sense seeing how Kincaid is one of the Elm Street kids, so he is glued on the situation. And even if Philip would have the habit of sleepwalking, Kincaid should realize just to play it safe and wake him up, seeing how they all know how dangerous dreaming can be. And when it comes to the dismissiveness that Kincaid showcases about concerning Philip's death, it kind of ties in, at least for me, even though it is, once again, it's a bit nonsensical coming precisely from an Elm Street kid
Right?
who, I repeat, is in the know of what is happening really within the institution. But for me, it is kind of trying to tie into the larger concept that the film has, which is the whole suicide plotline that the movie is going on. Essentially, in part three, those who haven't watched the film yet, the big thing is that Freddy is masquerading his murders as suicides. He kind of commits them in the way that to the outside world it looks like what really are murders would be suicides or freak accidents or just kids harming themselves. And this is and the outside world really buys into this concept. They really think that the kids are just being self harming,
Yeah, but this is something that
and
happens in first and second one. This kid who is in the cell and he apparently hangs himself. Everybody is okay with that information. He hanged himself and there was no dream monster involved, clearly. And in the second part, you have the body takeover, where once again Freddy is kind of setting up his body there to that he would have committed these acts.
yeah, that is. But even though I do feel that but a Dream Warriors kind of does more with the idea. It does in parts one and two. It's essentially one character, and Freddy masquerades like one kill out of all of them as a suicide or something that someone else has done. I don't know, for some reason really, because then he goes full one shot killing everybody. But in Dream Warriors, that whole suicide attempt, or that whole suicide angle is like one of the main plot lines that the film follows, and it does kind of tie into what I think is one of the bigger strengths of Elm Street 3, that it kind of emphasizes Freddy's child molesting nature and behavior.
You know, it's funny when you talk about it. Sorry to interrupt, but indeed, in the first part and in the second part, the molestation part of the kids is never mentioned, but somehow it is dead obvious for the viewer that there must be some molestations involved. Like, who goes and collects kids and just burns them? Well, at least in the third part, where you have these kids with this bike and everything, you just get the molestation vibe from somewhere there.
You do, and of course, it's something worth to note that in the original run of Elm Street films, Freddy never was outed as child molester. He was always talked about as a child killer. The child molester thing was something that was confirmed in the remake eventually. But Wes Craven, when he wrote the first one, he did write Freddy as a child molester.
Yeah,
And it was the producers who felt that that's too dark and demanded that Wes Craven takes the molestation out and turns Freddy simply a child killer.
that's pretty dark too.
That's pretty dark too, but somehow it was easier for New Line to sell as long as touching Jennies and penises were not involved.
Exactly, the American morals.
Yeah, it's okay to kill the kid, but just no penises, please.
Yeah.
But with that, the molestation angle was always hidden underneath the Kruger character, even though the films were too cowardly to say it out loud. The Kruger always carried the molestation aspect with him through and throughout the films. Even though the official theory always was, yeah, he was just a child killer. And with all that molestation and sexual assault, I kind of do find an added angle into Freddy masquerading his kills as suicides, because the effect that Freddy this way has is that he manages to turn the blame for the deaths upon the kids, e.a. the victims. The the victims now gets seen as weak, as quitters, as someone who faces a hard time and can't handle it. They are downright ridiculed. Like Kirsten's mother makes the remark that she became more suicidal after her credit card got taken away, and that's really serious, like a horrible thing. So, Kirsten is fighting Kruger, and Kruger has made it appear to be in that light that even her own mother is kind of just making a joke out of it, really. And all of that, the victim blaming, the gaslighting, turning your loved ones against you, all of that is actually pretty much in sexual predator molestator modus operandi. So on that level, I do think that there actually is quite a lot going on in Dream Warriors with the whole suicide plotline.
Something that you have discussed before is that even though you could see these some of characters inside the hospital, for example, this elder lady nurse, who whatever was her title,
Sims, if I
Sims.
remember correctly.
Yeah, the Doctor Sims. She is of course just doing her job to the best of her understanding and tries to protect the kids from her perspective. I remembered her as being this very malevolent, evil character who really doesn't care about the kids, but that is not so evident on the screen actually. If it's just a bunch of different perspectives that you have this Nancy who already has gone through the entire ordeal, even though she doesn't tell anything about anything for the first half of the film and just lets a couple of kids die without saying anything. Perhaps waiting for the perfect moment then a little bit too long, whichever the case. There's this character, and then there is this character who is kind of on the verge, like, is Nancy taking a little bit too much hypnosil, or is there something to it? And then there is this traditional Dr. Sims. And then there is the whole, we can also jump on to this whole science versus religion that they so like to put into the film. And oftentimes, yeah, it can work, and sometimes it's just like put in there and making it, I guess, kind of a quasi intellectual or deeper than you would see on the surface type of thing. I don't know if it's really pushed enough here.
I think that it is pushed pretty heavily. Um, when it comes to the science versus religion, this is something that horror movies kind of are condemned to do, especially these days when supernatural horror has become more popular. There is kind of like if you follow horror films to their silent film roots, to the black and white era, you can kind of see this shift in horror movies in during the silent time. Horror films were often movies where there was something weird going on. There was some kind of a monster or something. People disappeared and appeared in weird places. It looked like it was a haunting. but at the end of the film, it gets revealed that nothing supernatural is going on. It's just some kind of a sadistic mean bastard doing all of this. The monster is either deformed or under heavy layers of makeup, and all the weird appearing and disappearing. Well, it's just secret passages, really. And during this time period, horror films were very much science oriented. Like there was the the conclusion was reached through a rational, often man character who is the one who finds the hidden doors and eventually solves the case, so to say. But once films or horror started to reach color, they started to become more and more supernatural. This already happened in black and white era, certainly. Even in some silent films, there were supernatural creatures, like for example, Morna's Nosferatu.
Hmm.
But the kind of a more modern horror films become, the more and more they started to lose this aspect of, well, there's a rational explanation behind everything, and it became more and more supernatural. And the problem with this, or quote unquote problem, depending on how you feel about it, is that after supernatural is introduced into a horror film, it automatically means that the religious side wins over the story. You
Yeah.
can't really have vampires, ghosts, and ghouls and then be like, well, there is no supernatural, it's all scientific. That just goes out of the window. You can't scientifically explain Freddy Krueger. So supernatural and religious side automatically in horror movies proves that the scientific take is at wrong. The shrinks at the institution who try to logically solve the Kruger problem, they are wrong because Kruger is supernatural, hence religious threat. And the only way to fight against Kruger is to go with supernatural and religious uh, counterpunches.
Yeah, and essentially religion wins at the end as the prevailing
Yeah,
argument.
pretty much in yeah, pretty much in every horror film these days, thanks to the whole supernatural thing.
Yeah.
In Dream Warriors, religion also wins the actual argument going on in the film. The non-character that gets introduced in Dream Warriors has a really small but still prominent debate with the main male character, the psychiatrist from the institution, about how he should tackle the situation.
Yeah.
All those notions about how science appears to be very lonely and sad religion and some such. And with Kruger, everything the nun says gets proven out to be true.
And
Science is sad and a lonely religion, and you should really put your faith in the cross, man.
yeah, this is kind of weird coming from, well, it's not only written by Wes Craven, but you'll think that he has something to do with this. And this Wes Craven, I don't think he is particularly religious, but what happens here is legitimizing the faith of Christianity, just like that, connecting it directly with Kruger and how to beat Kruger. Not particularly a fan of this approach, and not also a fan of films that have this, well, as I put it, magical nun, but obviously a ghost nun, but magical in nature nun who just does these appearances, essentially a ghost. And we have seen this so many times, at least in the 2K onwards. Not sure how prominent this was as a theme in the movies of those times, but god damn am I tired of this theme. As the nun being some
You
kind,
mean
as the nun character being some kind of a orator of morality and what you should do and where you should go and that kind of thing.
yeah, yeah, it's most definitely it's not the film's strongest suit.
Yeah.
Like, as you mentioned, Christianity in the end, it very prominently prevails over everything else in this film. The when it comes to understanding Freddy, basically the added backstory that you get to the character, that comes from the nun. The main idea, or even for fuck's sake, the direct answer how to win Freddy, bury him in the hallowed ground, that comes from the nun.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, Freddy doesn't even get beaten in the dream world by the so-called dream warriors. He gets beaten with holy water and cross.
Yeah.
So eventually, yeah, in Dream Warriors, it is Christianity above everything else.
And the problem is that it seems like a cheap solution. Like we cannot really get all of this backstory out of Fred Krueger, so we have to introduce another character to do the job, essentially just giving that backstory, essentially being the catapult for solving the entire film. And there is no backstory really to this character. We get to find out it in the end what this character is all about. But that it's just kind of convenient. Here I pop up and here's what you need to do.
It is, and it also to me kind of showcases that the script writers read themselves into the corner,
Uh-huh.
where they really like in Dream Warriors. It's supposed to be so that Kruger now is more powerful than ever before,
For some
and he
reason.
can do more stuff
Yeah.
than ever before. For some reason which doesn't really make any sense from a guy who has already gotten his ass kicked twice.
Because apparently he has so much power from the previous kids that now he's too powerful and a group is needed.
Yeah, yeah, and all this nonsense seems to lead, at least for me, it seems to lead into a situation where the script writers no longer really knew how to finish off Kruger because he has to die at the end of the film.
Yeah, the
So they then reach to perhaps one of the more easier, perhaps even easiest solutions that you can have into the Kruger problem, which is that you just douse him in holy water and throw a cross at him, and remember to bury the bones. Problem solved.
yeah, it was
And that
Wes Craven's Wes Craven's kind of a wish that this would be it where we have taken the film serious, I suppose, in as many directions as is needed, and he didn't want any sequels to begin with for Nightmare on Elm Street, and he wanted to end it right here, but oh boy, this made some money, and indeed, Nightmare on Elm Street 3 was the one that, as kind of stated, served as the kind of the instruction manual on how to do Elm Street from now on.
for better and for the worst, yeah, it did.
But regarding
It did.
what about the pacing, Henrik? Because I think the film is not particularly well paced, at least when it comes to if you're trying to be horror here, it's just not really working out. There's no build up. Freddy appears in places, often very close, too close for comfort, instead of what happens perhaps in the first two parts where he gradually gets nastier and closer and more violent. But people here die, but it's like very separate scenes where this happens. There's one particular scene given for one character to die, and from the beginning it's kind of obvious. Okay, this guy's gotta go now. But what is the actual plot-wise consequences of that death? I don't think it's as strong as it was, for example, in the first one.
It kind of depends on what death you are looking at. Um, First of all, I do agree with you on the fact that in Dream Warriors, Freddy more or less just appears. He is no longer any kind of a, as you put it, looming threat that gets larger and larger and closer as the film progresses. In here, he is in the forefront immediately, and nobody really is anymore shadowed by Freddy. Kind of when the film starts, we are already in the midway point of the first film. Like Kirsten starts at the exact same point where Nancy took something like 20 or 30 minutes to reach. She is already eating raw coffee and doing everything to stay awake. And Freddy already has kind of left all, most of that taunting stuff behind him, and at this point is almost 100% now ready to kill his targets. And while yeah, that takes the build up out of Kruger's presence, to me it didn't bother me that much because, as mentioned, this is the third film in the franchise, so Kruger has been built up. At this point, Kruger is mostly there to serve the gore hungry audiences. At this, during Dream Warriors, you're mostly just tuning in to see what Freddy does this time, who gets killed, and how Freddy is finished off. The mystery around Kruger really got solved in the first one.
Yeah, I will give it to the film that it starts really quickly. Frankly, I never quite understood why they needed to use the Nancy house, the Elm Street house, as kind of the location where most of the dreams are centered on. In the original scripts, it was supposed to be the home of Fred Krueger. Obviously, the crowd is not gonna quite understand that unless you give a lot of visual clues and you spend time on that, because we haven't seen the home of Fred Krueger so far. But then also using Nancy's home, it's kind of weird. But it apparently does, and obviously does, serve as kind of the center of his dreamscape. And there, it kind of seems like there are some sets inside this house, and from which people fall out of, literally, at least in one scene, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, it's a the house is more of a amusement park
Yeah,
at this point than any kind of a home.
yeah,
And when you look at the house, if you don't know that it's supposed to be Nancy's previous home or past home, you actually get the idea that it's Freddy's apartment, really, because everything looks like shit, and there's rotting pigs on the table, and the weird ghost kids are like, well, this is the basement where he brings us.
yeah.
Hee hee hee.
Freddy's home.
So it's only the midpoint of Dream Warriors when Nancy makes the remark that I used to live in that house, and I'm always like, what the fuck?
Right,
Wasn't that Freddy's home?
right. Hmm. I found some kind of hurtful myth upkeeping in the film. For example, even though the film's kind of one big subplot, if you will, is the suicide, there are some rather politically incorrect quotes like suicide, it's a cowardly thing, something like that, that the male dog is spewing out of his mouth, which is not entirely fair. Then there is another moment about the out of wedlock birth, which apparently makes for a child murderer and rapist.
Yeah, yeah, those two things. Well, to tackle them both here in episode. With the first one, this being the suicide is a cowardly thing, I don't have a problem within this one movie, within Dream Warriors. Obviously, I disagree with the notion very heavily. I am not one of those people who condemned suicide. And with that out of the way, I can see that the characters of the film are condemning of suicide. To me, it kind of ties down into the whole grander theme of victim blaming. And Freddy making the other characters to make the argument that this is your own goddamn fault. And
Yeah,
because of that, I'm kind of forgiving to the suicide attempt. The suicide is a cowardly thing argument in Dream Warriors, not necessarily outside of it, but in Dream Warriors. When it comes to your second point, the second harmful myth that out of wedlock
or
comes child murderers and
or
rapists.
even to be more specific, not only out of wedlock, but being, well, r- being raped and then giving birth to this child.
Yeah. Yeah. That is actually much more complicated and way more harder. That's one of the things where the film fucks it up. In fact, this is my main problem with the non-character and the whole added backstory to Fred Krueger.
What is it, the bastard child of the 100 maniacs? That's pretty bad as well in this.
Yeah, precisely that, which is absolute horseshit. Like, let's tackle the whole bunch of things here. First of all, Fred Krueger's added backstory is unneeded, unnecessary, and
Thank you.
frankly, in fact, quite damn stupid. I understand why they did it. It's once again to build more brand recognition, to give Fred Krueger ominous bad guy nickname.
Uh,
From Dream Warriors onwards, Krueger fans have repeatedly referenced Krueger as the bastard son of 100
yeah, it
maniacs.
repeats in 4, 5, and I don't know, 6. Goes on and on.
It does.
And
It does. And I get.
it, it's just the problem of sequels in general. As we've seen 100 times in when taking an extremely ridiculously close loop on the Halloween franchise. There is this kind of a natural need to give more backstory as you go on and on and on. And it's kind of the curse if you're gonna do a sequel. Yeah, that's kind of what you end up with.
Yeah, and from producer point, I do agree. I do understand why you wanna do it, but it really was unnecessary.
Hmm.
It wasn't needed in this case, and it leads into a couple of pretty damn big problems when it comes to the film, and when it comes to kind of the overarching theme of nightmare films. The first problem, a really major one, is that the film ends up doing eugenics. It ends up arguing that evil and being a bad person is a genetical trait.
Yeah.
100 bad person rape
Yeah.
a perfectly good and innocent woman. So all that bad sperm now is forever contaminated Kruger in a way that, well, Kruger doesn't really have a choice. He can't choose to be bad. Being evil is not something that he finds himself. He's already condemned because personal traits and exactly how sadistic asshole you are. It doesn't stem from your surroundings. It doesn't stem from bad parents. It doesn't stem from mental illness. No, it's genes. You just had the rapist gene in you.
Yeah.
Jesus fucking Christ.
Nature, nurture, nothing to do with it. And by the way, this whole talk in the film with the nun, bastard child of 100 maniacs, it all ties down very heavily to different ideologies of the church.
It does. It ties down in the, for example, the notion of the original sin, the primordial sin.
There you go.
Eve and Adam falling out of heaven, out of paradise, and because of that, all of humanity is automatically contaminated. It's not a direct parallel, but that's also kind of what happens in here. The nun falls from paradise from her convent, and with that, when she gets locked up with the maniacs, and from that fall, she is now tainted, and basically everything that spawns from her is automatically tainted. So I do see kind of a strong parallels to the basic concept of the original sin, and kind of the roots of Christian faith, the roots of Catholicism in that whole goddamn backstory. And the second problem that emerges from the whole evil is genetic thing is that it primes Freddy to be a kind of a automatically unforgivably evil. The running theme behind the Elm Street films has been the point that the parents of the Elm Street children were kind of at wrong when they murdered Freddy. Like, obviously, I'm not making justifications for Krueger. He was child molester and child killer. None of that is redeemable or defendable. But still, in our everyday society, we are supposed to follow laws and rules. That the whole idea behind Kruger is that laws were seem unfit when Kruger was alive. So the parents retort back into vigilante justice, and they take the law onto their own hands. And even though you can understand why the parents did this, it still is a wrong thing to do in a modern society. We are not supposed to embrace vigilantism and the lynch mob justice, which is what the parents embarked. And on that aspect, on aspect of being lynched, Kruger is still kind of victim. That's one of the reasons exactly why you are supposed to follow law,
Mm,
why you are supposed to stick with the rules. Because if you break the rules, the fucking child molester can make the case that, well, I was also being victimized when I was burned alive. Because that's not how society is supposed to work. And on that one individual aspect of being lynched, Kruger kind of has a point in being angry at the parents. Once again, it does not justify his actions. In the films, you being pissed, it does not mean that you can now, in revenge, kill a bunch of kids. Obviously not. But Kruger's anger can somehow be understood. But but if we take the reading that evil is genetical, in that case, there really was no point ever to do anything else except, torch up Kruger. The rules and laws can't really be applied to him since he is genetically evil,
yeah,
since he's pure evil.
it's kind of
And
yeah, it's kind of interesting what the film is telling about souls and tortured souls that need to remain on the earth because usually something evil had been done against them, so they need to remain and try to forever go on some kind of a loop to repeat some kind of a past events, and they can't release their ghost because they need to resolve this incident. I'm not sure where this resolving part exactly comes in Kruger's part, but interesting juxtaposition when we have perfectly normal and decent people who had some horrible happen to them in their lifetime, and Kruger and that person, they roam the earth because of wrongdoing. Hmm.
yeah, we kind of like humanity, or at least Western humanity. I would say this is extremely global phenomena, but we kind of really do have a hold on the concept of revenge. Like we pump out revenge fiction, revenge fantasies to a point where we now have specified Reddit groups and specified online groups simply centered around the concept of revenge, justice being served, something being avenged. And we kind of take this to a really nasty conclusion where we now have people who even fantasize, who now fantasize that somebody, for example, would try to rob them just so that they could kick that robber's head in an act of revenge, in act of street justice and vengeance. And something that kind of everybody seems to forget get with that is that if we accept revenge as a viable solution. If we say that revenge is okay, then we have to ask exactly who has the right to revenge. Because the
Mm.
notion we take is that if you are wronged, if somebody wrongs you, you have the right to get revenge on that person. But in doing so, you also break against that person. So does he now have the counter right to take revenge on you? And if he does, well, do you still have the right to revenge? You kind of get locked into an endless cycle. And then you can add into this cycle the side effect. Basically, everybody who knows you, your friends and loved ones, which is something that kind of goes behind the scenes, even though never mentioned in the crime revenge thriller subgenre of films. Like, for example, Death Wish, Death Wish series, where the whole main concept is that the main character starts to get revenge on the world and ends up killing a hell of a lot of people. So,
Yeah, and we justify that. Yeah.
yeah. So those people have loved ones, they have families, they have girlfriends who now have lost a person who has been shot. Do those people now also have the right to revenge? Because how could just one person of all of us have the right to avenge the wrongdoings done to him?
Mm.
So you kind of like in our hard on to have revenge and to downright fetishize the act of a vengeance, we are kind of condemning our entire society to run around circles in this never-ending cycle of revenge where everybody is just constantly taking revenge and nothing ever gets solved because you just create more and more hurt and more crime with your righteous vengeance.
Revenge equals loop.
Yeah, and that's what happens with Freddy also. The parents feel that they have the right to avenge, so they burn up Kruger. Kruger now is pissed and decides to take revenge, and you get tied down into this whole situation where everybody's taking revenge on Kruger, Kruger is taking revenge on everybody, and essentially everybody becomes a victim.
Let me have one of those point blank questions for the kids and maybe the adults as well. Henrik, do you believe in ghosts?
Yes and no. Yes and no. Not really. No.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
my take on ghosts is pretty much the same as my take on with God. I kind of find it extremely hard to believe in any of those things, but at the same time, I have to admit that I don't have the absolute ultimate facts.
Yeah.
I have a lot of facts. I have a lot of things that have been considered mystic and then have been proven to be nothing more than scientific phenomena. But when it comes to something like really grandiose, like the existence of God, existence of any kind of spirit plane, I don't have like the one thesis to end them all, to prove that no, they most definitely do not exist. So even though I don't believe in any of that, I I kind of leave the back door just a little bit open, just a tiny crack there, just so that
Yeah.
if any of that ever would prove its existence to me, and I would most definitely require some god ass heavy proof, I would be extremely long time skeptic in that situation. But would that happen? I am willing to admit that that there is a like 0.00001% chance of that happening. But I'm willing to give that, admit that percentage being there.
Yeah, it definitely sounds, the whole concept of ghosts sounds something that could be too easily manufactured by the human mind, and especially the religious type of mind, or actually essentially just the human mind who wants to justify the existence or their existence and their friend's existence in the afterworld, somewhere in some type of another form, because it would be convenient and soothe them and make them maybe more calm that there is something after this. Honestly, I don't know why that would be necessarily a good thing, but since we can't say, since we can't see everything that exists even now, let's just leave the tiny door open just a little bit. We don't know everything.
Yeah, but of course, it's you do well to remember that. Well, human history is ripe with examples of people faking ghosts and
Yeah.
simple eye chemistry, eye movement things, and simple brain chemistry leading into some kind of vague notions of haunting or something like that, which have been logically and scientifically proven to be false.
Yeah, it's so disappointing, isn't it, when you're starting to read about something really exciting, even some guy who apparently was photographed in the past and was claimed to be some guy who just appeared on some kind of a square, which was reported in some newspaper at the time or something, and seemed to be some kind of a guy from a future. But then it had been proven later that the story was completely fabricated. But there's so many. Yeah, yeah. Let's just
Yeah,
yeah,
it is extremely anticlimactic.
yeah.
Like for better or worse, most likely I would just end up losing my goddamn life. Would it turn out that supernatural is real and ghosts are real? Uh, I most likely wouldn't survive horror movie scenario, but by God, facing that scenario would be extremely interesting and exciting.
When it comes to dreams, as we're kind of on the off topic but somehow related train, what's your most disturbing dream if you remember anything?
My main problem is that I don't really dream that often. I, God damn, I'm on that camp who has had to take medication in order to sleep properly,
Hypnosil?
and
Of course, that's not a real drug, but yeah,
I don't remember what was the product that I had to take.
yeah.
But I had this moment, this long ass time period that I didn't see dreams, and it did affect my dreaming in a sense that I didn't get into the proper levels of dream. So I would sleep like 8 to 10 hours and just wake up tired for a hell of a long time before I got brain medication. And these days, I, I guess I'm now in the point where I guess I do see dreams because I do feel a hell of a lot better. There was a moment when I just believed a long time in this hazy existence where I was so constantly tired that eventually, my waking hours were like I didn't properly taste food anymore, and I just wasn't really connected to anything. And now I'm past that. Like food tastes great, and I feel relaxed and energized, and 8 hours of sleep does wonders to me. I still can't. So I guess I do dream now. I just can't remember any of them.
Yeah. You know, Henrik, it's. I've had this one experience that was just really something else, and then I read that actually there are countries like I believe in the Philippines, they definitely have these beliefs in different kinds of spirits in kind of every aspect of life. But they also have these beliefs that some spirits can come into your dreams and do some pretty nasty stuff for you. And as far as I understand it, there are still some really not explained cases of lots of people having some kind of dreams and then having some convulsions and never waking up. They actually get a heart attack or some system fails when this happens, seeming like they're having an absolutely terrifying dream and they just die. Their system shuts down, and and this is associated with the sleep paralysis phenomena. And I can say that I'm pretty sure that I had this once because it was essentially exactly as it was described online when I started reading that. I was like, holy shit. It's when you think you are already half awake, some kind of a state that you think you see your room, like you can see around, but you can't move your body. And then you start seeing some kind of it's always some kind of a shape that starts to approach you. Of course, the extremely creepy kind of shape. And it starts to get closer and closer, and it starts possibly crawling on top of your body in some cases and looks absolutely disturbing. You can't really make out what the fuck it is, but it's approaching you and you can't move an inch. And yeah, I wake up. I woke up with like completely terrified because it was the most realistic feeling dream that I've ever had, and I was really screaming when I finally fucking got out of it.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't be the only one. Uh, in 1977, there was this group thing that happened in United States and Canada. There were these Hmong refugees who had immigrated to the US and Canada. If I remember correctly, they had been living some time already in those countries. And then, was it like on a span of 1 year, most of the young men of those refugees all died
Yeah,
during their sleep. And before they died, before like that final night, they had very similar type of nightmares, which they talk about, where they also had seen this dark shape, a figure in their room, and they had grown more and more terrified of that figure.
yeah, yeah. That is truly something else. So this was an extremely successful film. It was made with a budget of about 4.5 million dollars at the time and made about 44 million, so it was a huge success. Reviews were favoring the film, unlike the previous entry, albeit the previous entry was extremely profitable. But the studio was even contemplating whether they will want to move ahead with the third installment in the franchise. But they did, and favorite performance, Henrik?
On my end, and I guess this really is not surprise. It's Robert England. Is this now third time that he's been my favorite performance in an Elm Street film?
Well, that is the easy way here.
Yeah, the kind of thing with Dream Warriors is that a lot of the performances are quite inconsistent. Like you have some good ones, like Craig Wasson or Lawrence Fishburne, who do pretty good staple performances. Then you have more of your mixed bag, like Patricia Arquette, who is you kind of either love it or hate it. I don't really mind her performance, but I do know people who really don't care for her. And essentially everybody agrees that Heather Langenkamp is kinda well good and bad depending on the scene. She is pretty natural in some scenes and then absolutely wooden in others.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. There is one scene in the corridors where she's talking to Max and trying to coax Max to let her in, and that I thought was quite hideous performance right there.
It is.
Yeah,
And unfortunately, that is not the only time when she's off in her performance.
Patricia Arquette was actually to be possibly replaced just a few days before Principal, but the director then convinced otherwise. I don't know the reason why she was about to be possibly replaced, but I can think of reasons why. Because the acting sounds really wooden. It just sounds like she's reading from a paper all the time. I don't know if it's just how she is, but it doesn't sound natural to me. I'm willing to give all kinds of excuses for this little kid performance here in the boiler room. All of this. This is where he takes us. Because it's this kind of a creepy kid shtick anyway. I'm willing to look past that. But as far as my favorite performance, I would actually go with this Zaza Gabor on the television. Because because that was natural, apparently, according to Robert England. Completely improvised. I mean, I don't know what the situation was exactly. Like, did she really think that she was in some kind of a talk host situation? Nevertheless, Robert England claims that she didn't know what was coming and she got genuinely terrified when Robert England finally comes out of there with those fingers and who gives a fuck what you think? Awesome.
Yeah, that's very specific performance. I must give you that much.
Favorite quote.
Ah,
There's the obvious and then there's the less obvious ones.
there is the obvious. I somebody has to go with the obvious, which has been used already to death.
Yeah,
So I claim this is your prime time pitch.
yeah. Yeah. Let's just that's obviously that one first for me. It's absolutely the funniest moment also in the film. Yeah. This is it, Jennifer. Your big break in TV. Welcome to prime time, bitch. But also that who gives a fuck what you think? It's coming so out of nowhere. Love it.
It does, and once again, Elm Street 3 it is actually surprisingly quotable movie.
Yeah.
Like, surprise, surprise. Once again, when we are not dealing with any kind of high art, all of a sudden you are swimming in one-liners and quotations.
Favorite kill.
Well, kills in Dream Warriors they are really interesting because you get some really great kills, and then you have some really laughably lackluster kills. But what kind of a combines all the kills is that the kills in Dream Warriors, I always felt that this is the moment where Freddy starts to become more sadistic in a sense. Not necessarily in violence department. There are some truly horrific kills here, but like mentioned, some of them are really lackluster. But what I kind of found from Dream Warriors kills and the kills following this one is that these usually target on the character's fears and their inner pain. Like mentioned already, in the previous films, what Kruger mostly does it's knife kills, it slashes, he cuts someone open. But now that the franchise gets more fantastical, the kill starts to be more utilizing something that you like or something that you fear and hate. If you are a recovering narcotic, then what Kruger does, he taunts you with drug needle fingers. If you are someone who is paralyzed, Kruger taunts you with a demonic wheelchair. It doesn't necessarily work. Like I said, lackluster kills. But there is that added effect of psychological torment when Kruger takes something and really rubs it in your face. And also, he does this in a perverse way into something that you like. Like it goes with Jennifer, who dreams of being a TV starlet, and whose safe space and solace is found from TV programs, and then Kruger turns into a TV and murders her. So there is this kind of a twisted mind game that starts to happen with the kills. That out of the way, my favorite kill of the film, this one, it would be Philip, who gets turned into a human marionette and perhaps is the most visceral of all the murders in Dream Warriors. There is something with the whole notion of your tendons being pulled out and used to move you.
Yeah, I suppose you can say that's creative. Yeah, yeah. Interestingly, in the real world, you couldn't see the tendons being out. So in this case, the violence wasn't still like actualized yet.
Yeah, it's once again it's a goddamn thing with the rules. But like Freddy cuts you open in a dream world, but because it's a dream, that the violence does not show outside in the real world. But then again, he can send the message by cutting the dude's stomach
Yeah, yeah, which he
somehow.
which he apparently then didn't do, because I'm not so sure that it he still had those cuts later.
Yeah, yeah.
Right,
Like
dream cuts.
yeah, you can fucking write an essay on trying to understand how the rules are supposed to work in nightmares. They never work. The rules
Yeah,
are absolute dog piece. And because of that, I feel that it's a hollow argument to chase after, well, this didn't stick to the rules, or this is keeping in with the rules. Because even Wes Craven fucked up with the rules.
he did. My favorite kill is Jennifer and her big break in TV. That is all. It's also really creative, and the way that they prepared for this, they had five different fake TVs for different shots that they were gonna take, and then they were able to pull it off with fake head of Freddy and then sometimes real Freddy or England. Great stuff. Really inventive deaths in this film, if nothing else. Three adjectives to describe Noah's 3.
Uh, Creative because of the already 500 times stated reasons. Brutal because when the kills work, they actually are pretty gnarly, and also funny because I have this mixed reaction with Dream Warriors. There are the moments when I do feel the tension and I'm kind of on the edge of my seat, and then there are the moments where I'm just laughing
Yeah,
and having a fun time with the more fantastical elements and some of the jokes of the film. Does it necessarily work as an ultimate horror masterpiece? Because it's not necessarily, but I usually am entertained by the movie.
yeah, fantastical, also funny, and I should go with the tertiary because I think it's kind of fitting. Well, it's the third movie, and usually what happens around in sequels around the third part when it comes to horror is that it's starting to get a little bit of this too much of this backstory, and the troubles start to show. But yeah, tertiary. Would you recommend Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors?
On my end, I would, even though at the same time, it bears to remember that this may still not be necessarily a film that you like. I do kind of make the point that Dream Warriors most likely is more the Nightmare on Elm Street films that you remember and you are familiar with, like like the style of this. When somebody pops up mentions Nightmare on Elm Street, I would believe that most of the listeners would be thinking something in style with Dream Warriors or the later sequels more than the more grounded for two previous entries. So in that sense, yeah, Dream Warriors, in my opinion, it is the moment when the franchise makes the tonal shift into something that guess most people would be familiar with, or something that they would think about when they think about Nightmare. Does it always work? No, no, not really. It doesn't always work as a horror film. It doesn't always work even as a film. There is stuff like the added backstory and some such which are unnecessary and unneeded and can even be quite aggravating. And at times the film really does miss the mark. But I still feel that Dream Warriors is one of the best entries in Nightmare franchise. At least that is to me, not necessarily to anyone, everybody, but I still, from my point, I do recommend Dream Warriors.
Yeah. Well, it's a mixed bag, but now looking at this film again with fresh eyes, I don't have such of a mm, well, not disdain, but I have softened up for the film a bit. As an overall package, I still would argue that th- there are better examples in the franchise out there, but there are some scenes that kind of elevate it. Yeah, sadly, it's kind of these certain moments here and there, not the film as a whole, really, that I like. There are nice ideas, but ultimately there's this bad acting, these nonsensical character decisions, the added non subplot or plot, and guiding the whole trajectory of the film. But goddamn, I do enjoy the moment with Jennifer when she gets her big break in TV and all that comes with it, and some of those inventive kills and the jokes that this film is really hilarious at times. And I suppose I should also mention Rodney Eastman, like my probably biggest teenage crush. Here we go again. So I used to just rewind this film and the fourth one, especially the fourth one, only because of Rodney Eastman. Just checking those scenes when he gets butchered at his waterbed. Great times, great times. And even today, dude looks fucking fantastic. Gotta say. Where were we? Yeah, recommendation because of aforementioned small, but ultimately I think this is a film that you should check out because you might just have fun, just a bit. After this, not so much.
Yeah. To me, I do find some enjoyment in all the installations, even the part six, to a point where I can at least partly defend the movies.
To a fault.
But the fact still remains that from three onwards, the attempts at pure horror they start to wane from the franchise to a point where eventually it becomes it becomes outright comedy. That's what part six is. Nobody's anymore trying to take anything seriously. But three is in the still that water break moment where it halfly tries to be a horror film and half of it is the new shit.
Yeah, it's broken,
It
but
is.
but
It is broken.
but I still do prefer.
It is mixed bag.
It's a mixed bag. I do prefer my one and two, but um, uh, maybe to a surprise to my as to myself, still it's a recommendation also the third part. Yeah, I kind of turned around during these days when I was researching it, just a bit.
So with that out of the way, what would be the next film?
Well, I guess we're gonna just go back to the fatherland. It's been 1 year again, and it's wow, this time goes really fastly by. But it looks like
What is the Finnish Independence Day creeping us once again?
it's looming on the horizon once again.
Well, then it just has to be Unknown Soldier once again.
Or a battleship Potemkin.
That would be a mean trick to pull.
Maybe some other time.
You know. Well. The only thing that could make that stunt even more worse for our Finnish listeners would we, if we would do Battleship and have that guy from Rusafar's podcast to be a guest?
We could have an actual Russian guest as well. But you know what would be interesting though would be to have a Russian guest to talk about the unknown soldier.
That could also be.
Yeah.
It could also lead into some pretty tough fights.
Well, you know,
There's versions on who did what during the Winter War. I'm just saying.
yeah, I would reckon that the latest one from 2017 is still the fairest depiction of events out of these three movies. Oh yeah, and I think we should talk about it already. That we're gonna do some changes here in the lab. So
Yup.
yeah,
We have heard your feedback that some of you some of you that the more heretical listeners of our podcast wish to some changes into the formula, and for once in your entire lifetimes we actually do agree with you guys, so we are going to shape up the formula a bit. We already have started to do that work. Some of you may have noticed that the scene by scene is kind of out of the window. It's a ghost that occasionally pops up like with Codefinger anymore, but we mostly when it came to walking through the entire film, we are not no longer doing it, and the changes will get more drastic.
yeah, they will. So what you heard now is the fourth last episode in this format. There's still 3 episodes to come, as per usual. But starting next year, it's gonna be, instead of 4 episodes a month, it's gonna be 2 episodes a month. But not only that, it's not gonna be even necessarily the usual one movie per week. It's gonna be like a theme episode every second week, bi weekly. So we will delve into the worlds of directors and their careers in one episode, for example. We might check out, I don't know, the Alfred Hitchcock's films from the 20s, and the next one would be about the 30s. Can I market this in any better way? What else?
It might be the remnants, the rests of a franchise we have already visited
Yeah.
in previous episodes. It might be the rest of the Hellraisers in just condensed into one episode, trying to figure out what the fuck happened. It might be the Jurassic Park sequels, once again condensed in one episode, trying to look exactly what the film franchise is trying to say about genetics and life and things in general. It it might be, Clint Eastwood films, trying to look how the dude has made essentially the same goddamn movie, just playing a different character for 15 fucking times. Who knows?
Footnote, I'm not gonna watch all Clint Eastwood films for one episode.
Well, you don't have to. You don't have to. But basically, you watch one. You've seen them all.
Yeah, we have started to see the kind of shortcomings, the problems of the format that we have been doing here for over 2 years now. For example, the problem of, which is quite evident, is the problem of sequels. We still want to talk about sequels here, but the problem arises where we don't want to make a singular episode of Jurassic Park 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So
No.
so it's better to look at it as a kind of a phenomenon for example, one episode.
Yeah. Same also goes with Nightmare sequels.
And it's not only about the sequels, indeed. We might look at the careers of directors or, for example, the cinema of a particular country.
Yeah, cinema of particular time period, perhaps.
Or,
Like, for example, American cinema following the 9/11, how that affected things.
Finnish underground, schlock horror, maybe Ang Lee's Father Knows Best trilogy. There's like unlimited things that we could do here. And I'm pretty excited about that.
Same here, same here. It's that the future is still a mystery even to us. We don't know how this will eventually pan out. But well, we have done in-depth look into one film for over 2 years now,
Yeah,
and I guess I too feel that perhaps we have ridden this horse long enough,
yeah,
and perhaps we are now ready to tackle even bigger challenges.
yeah. I think so. I think it will be more interesting to our listeners, and it will give us rejuvenized energy to continue even further. There is one horse that you can ride, then the horse dies, and then you need to pick up another horse. I think that's just life. We're trying to keep this interesting also for ourselves. And given that we are now changing the format into something like this, we need to have this as a bi-weekly from next year onwards. And
Most definitely,
and also
you don't.
it's just the general workload that we have had for 2 years. And I'm looking at like the friends on the other side of the pond, or for example the Russia Files Unite Russian film podcast from the UK, done by Ali Pitts, and I really like what they're doing. They're really in depth. They have really great guests related to the episodes, and I was shocked that he's doing it only once a month. We're doing this 4 times a month, and
Mhm.
we are basically killing ourselves doing it. So
Yeah, we are. We are. Like some of us haven't seen their friends for who God knows in how long time, because basically until the break, which eventually comes during the Christmas period once again, your entire week essentially is being used completely back searching that week's film.
and I have to still edit the goddamn beast on top of that.
Yeah, yeah. So hopefully this change, even though now we tackle kind of a more grandiose things. Now one episode can consist more movies than previously, because and that may require us that we watch more films, but hopefully that also kind of gives us also some free time.
Yeah, and yeah,
At least now we can pan out the background work for a longer time period, because now we have 2 weeks.
I think so, and I think it will improve a lot of things. I think I can be more active on the social media without having the constant pressure of moving on constantly and not stopping and reflecting and planning out properly. And now we can also plan our weekends. We don't have to kind of, it's been like this that I can't really go anywhere, or if I go then it needs to be extremely thoroughly planned. If I go somewhere on Sunday, we need to take our all our recording gear and whatnot. So no, we need to change, and
Yeah,
hope you will still be listening to us after this.
yeah. Here's praying.
But as stated, we will still be going on the same rails until the end of the year. So next week, tune in hopefully for Tuntematon Sotilas once again. This time the 1985 edition.
This is Finnish cinema in a nutshell. Well, it's just the unknown soldier and nothing else.
Knowing myself, I'm probably gonna rewatch all of those 3 movies again, and at the end be like, I wanna kill myself.
I'm not even gonna try that task. I'm just gonna watch the 1985 version. Just focus on that. And I'm not gonna even speak towards the TV series version of 2017 Unknown Soldier.
More insanity next week.
Until then.
Toi peräpää ehkä vielä kestää vielä hetken, kunnes se ei kestä. Voidaan sitäkin kokeilla, olisi vähän laadukkaampi peräpää siellä vielä.